Hey everyone! Along the theme of topics that have existed since the early days of Star Citizen's development, the topic of griefing and piracy seems to rear its head at least once a year. Let's take a shallow dive into this subject and I'll discuss my views on it, what the definition of each is and how they impact the game, and what CIG has told us about their plans regarding them. Let's get this. First, let's start with some definitions, and through this, we can start to tell what is and isn't griefing. Griefing in games is typically defined as someone using the game as a tool to annoy or enrage another person. The game itself doesn't really matter in this situation, it's just a vehicle to be obnoxious to another real-life person. There's no gameplay added, there's no real in-game advantage gained, its sole purpose is to annoy, intimidate, or enrage another player, another person on the other side of the screen. And because we get invested in games and time, energy, and even money, especially the case with Star Citizen, many players will go to the griefer tag anytime they feel these emotions. Losing hours of work because someone blows you up can be frustrating. But does the fact that you're frustrated really mean that you were griefed? Not always. So now let's define the other aspects of PvP that could lead to what the victim might consider griefing, but is well within the bounds of Star Citizen's intended purpose, the whole purpose of the game. These are the game loops of piracy, marauding, and assassination. Piracy is likely the one that most gamers are familiar with, but just as a touchstone, piracy is generally taking another player's stuff without their permission. To further define piracy, the point isn't necessarily combat or killing the other player, it's just taking their stuff. Indeed, the point of piracy is typically not to kill the other player because you can then build up a rep with them. So you can say something like, oh, this is the Dread Pirate Roberts. If I just give him 10% of my cargo, I still make a profit on my run and I can go on my way. So an honorable pirate will get a rep just like an honorable trader will. People are less likely to fight, run away, or even self-destruct if they know that they'll be able to get out of the situation without losing everything anyways. It's more about getting the stuff with minimal effort and danger to both parties than mayhem and murder. The piracy loop is practically non-existent in the current build of Star Citizen, but is very much being planned for. Some orgs have become extremely creative in bringing this loop to the verse even so, but their abilities to do so are very limited. So the darker side of the piracy coin is marauding. Marauding generally takes the risk to the pirate out of the equation by killing the target, hopefully without destroying their ship in the process. So where a pirate might disable the ship and then ask for the cargo to be released, and then attack if those demands weren't met, marauders will disable a ship, violently board, and likely murder everyone on board, thus reducing the risk that some crew member will kill them or injure them, or sabotage the cargo. Back to the topic of reputation, a marauder will obviously have a very different reputation from a pirate. As it will become more obvious that there's no chance for escape, it's far more likely that a target will run away or fight to the last just because they know what the end result will be if they don't. To the target, this will definitely feel like griefing, but much like piracy, this is a planned loop. The marauder is still acting antisocial within the framework of the game. It's not personal, they're just making a living by preying on other players. Finally, assassins are kind of their own thing, kind of the flip side of the bounty hunter that only ever takes their target in dead. Of the three antisocial loops I'll be mentioning, this is the one that toes the line the hardest. The reason for this is because the assassin is doing their job, the target player will certainly believe that they've been killed for no good reason, and they were grieved. In reality, unbeknownst to the target, someone else paid that assassin to take out the player. Again, the assassin player is working within a game loop. They are playing within the framework of the game. It just so happens that their chosen career is taking out other players. To give an example of this, Trader B is killed by an assassin. To Trader B, this came out of nowhere. Maybe the assassin even just blew up their ship and left, certainly making it look like there was no in-game reason to act that way other than to grief them. But in reality, Trader A went to the assassin and said that Trader B was horning in on Trader A's trade route. It needed to be taken care of. The assassin is completely playing within the framework of the game. It just so happens that their chosen loop is destroying other players. So back to griefing, it now seems that there's a lot of gray areas here where an actual griefer can nest and claim they were doing one thing or the other, as opposed to griefing, which CIG will ban a player for. How can CIG tell what's legitimate gameplay and what's griefing? Granted, that's a pretty hard question to answer. Generally, griefing is deliberately trying to ruin someone else's game experience. Not to beat them in the game, not to make fat stacks, not to do anything but make another person in the meat world angry and hopefully rage quit the game. While harder to prove, it's one of those things that becomes obvious once a pattern is established. While that's little consolation to the person who's immediately griefed, it does mean that the griefer's access to the game will eventually be cut off. They'll be banned. For the valid but antisocial game loops, I already talked about this a bit in my chat on prisons and prison gameplay, but to reiterate the point here, the balance with these players will be their reputation and crime stat. Starsiz in lore has already defined the verse as a big place, and piracy and marauding aren't unheard of. In fact, the lore is replete with them. But if someone stacks up a big enough tab, someone else will come and collect it. And when that bill comes due, the consequences will be high. If you engage in these loops, just be aware there's a law of diminishing returns. But for some players, that's part of the fun, drawing out the time where the consequences come due as long as possible. For a real-world example, let's say that you are in an org that have locked down a location that's considered a high-value target by the community, a place where a significant number of players would want to visit if you and your org hadn't just locked it down. Even a poorly organized org that's relatively small, even 20 members or so, can be insurmountable for a solo player to overcome. Even if that org has brought the wrong weapons to the fight, isn't very experienced in PvP, and aren't tactically proficient, just through weight of numbers they'll be able to engage in seal clubbing of any solo who wants to challenge them. So by this token is the org griefing by denying other players access to the location, by swatting them out of the sky. Not really. There will certainly be territorial pissing matches in this game. In fact, it sort of seems like CIG is designing certain elements to encourage this. And resources will definitely be scarce specifically to encourage this. Let's say the org is making a big deal about it in chat, because they are trying to set up some cinematic event that they could record and have some script in their head of how it'll play out and so on. They send out a challenge in global chat, daring people to come into their planned meat grinder. Somewhere out in the verse, another player either wants to access that location that's been locked down and fortified, or maybe just wants to pick up that gauntlet that was so casually tossed down. They load up a big bomber, roll in on the fortified location, and drop their big-ass bomb. The org's whole plan is shot. Their gameplay, for the moment at least, goes up in a big ball of fire. So were they griefed? Well, no. An A2, for example, is specifically designed to dislodge entrenched targets, to remove large ground-based collections of targets. That's its whole point in this game. Is the A2 and other heavy military craft fully balanced in our current version of the game? Well, no, it's not, but CIG hasn't really shifted to balancing everything out. There's bigger fish to fry at the moment, such as the flight model itself, then emitters, components, and so on. In a planned show for later, I'll go into the things I think CIG will be changing that are mainstays of the verse right now. And one of these is the ability to have your highly specialized military-heavy bomber utterly destroyed and then back, fully kitted out 15 minutes later. But that's for another time. Right now, I hope this helped break down what I see as the difference between piracy and piracy-like behavior as opposed to griefing. If you agree or not, let me know down in the comments. If you like this, throw me a like and subscribe if you'd like to hear more. Thanks for watching. See me next time.